Hello, my name is Bill Stewart and welcome to my Cabernet Franc tasting. I'm going to take you through 5 different Cabernet Francs at different price points and from different countries around the world. If you'd like to join me and sip some wine while I talk, in just a minute I'll be showing you a link as to where to find the information on these 5 wines and some selected sources for them. In that link is also the ability to print out a placemat, which I have here, and you see the wine sitting on. One of the fun things about doing this wine tasting like this is comparing the wines at different price points and from different regions. So with each one at its own spot in the placemat, they won't get lost and you know which one's which, and have some more fun with doing that. So the 5 wines we'll be drinking, we're going to start with the Lazy Bone, which is an exclusive with Trader Joe's. And while you're sipping that, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history on Cabernet Franc and its unique place in wine history. We'll then move on to Argentina and the Piero Quiejo Cabernet Franc that they have, and as you're sipping that, I'll be talking a little bit about some of the distinctive Cabernet Franc tastes that you'll see in all the wines as part of that. Our third wine is Domaine Le Roque from France, and with this wine I'll be talking a little bit about where Cabernet Franc is made. So many countries around the world, and in 2 countries, France and the US, it's made in a number of different regions around that country, so I'll be driving down on those 2 just for a little bit. Our fourth wine is the Cabernet Franc Reserve from Barboursville in Virginia. And I'm very pleased that we have the winemaker from Barboursville, Luca, who's going to take us through and tell you all about that wine, some interesting things about the Barboursville vineyard as part of that. And then our last wine is the Griffin Creek Cabernet Franc, and this is from the Willamette Valley Vineyards, and Mackenzie Wolf Webb from Willamette Valley is going to be sharing some her insights to that wine, and again a little bit about Willamette Valley Vineyards and some interesting things there. My thanks greatly to Luca and Mackenzie for sharing and being part of this. When we're finished that, I'll finish up with a recommendation of 12 different other Cab Francs that we didn't taste that I think you might enjoy and be interested in tasting. So one of my goals is that you should always be drinking within 5 minutes of me talking. So take your glass of Cabernet Franc and have a of the Lazy Bones and have a sip. Hopefully in the instructions that I sent you saw to have the wine open and pre-poured so I had a chance to breathe. And now we'll go ahead and talk about each of the wines, and I'll move on to the first slide including that link information. Thanks very much. This wine tasting is done as part of my blog on wine, travel, and food, and you can see the link to that blog on this slide. You can find the information on the wines for this tasting by clicking on Wine Posts on the home page, and on the post, Wines for Recorded Video of the Cabernet Franc wine tasting, or you can jump right to that posting with the second link that's shown here. In that post, you can get the placemat for the 5 wines you'll be tasting to help keep track of which wine is which. If you've not checked out my blog, I hope you will take a look at the other postings on wine, travel, and food as well, and perhaps decide you want to follow that blog. If you would like a copy of these slides that I'm using, so you can have a picture of these 5 different bottles and or the recommendations that I do at the end, on the contact page of my blog, you'll find my email address. Send me a note with that request and I'll send you back the slides. I will recommend pausing this video after the discussion of each wines so that you can discuss them amongst the people you have doing this wine tasting with you, and then you can resume the recording. I think that kind of discussion really helps you appreciate the wine. Now let's talk about the Lazy Bones wine. This wine has been in my cellar for about 3 years now, and was one of the wines that I highly recommended in my earlier blog post of 10 great red wines for under $15. My son John introduced me to this wine from Trader Joe's, and it was love at first sip. I don't know of any other wine except for $7 that's as enjoyable as this one. I get red and black fruit aromas that continue into the taste, and a little extra cranberry flavor that I did not catch in the aroma. It also has some oaky chocolate notes that give it some depth. It is very fruit forward with pretty strong tannins. Hopefully opening the bottle early and giving it some time in the glass softens some of those tannins. This is one of my table wines that I always decant, and that really opens up the wine quickly. This wine is made at the Central Coast Wine Warehouse in California and is owned by the Hill family, who has about 7 other brands that they sell. This wine comes from several vineyards in the San Luis Obispo area of California and is sold exclusively to Trader Joe's, and they don't publish any information about how it's made. Perhaps the best indication of the value of this wine is it is sold out in almost all the Trader Joe's stores that carry wine. So it's not just Bill waving the flag for this wine. The 2021 vintage should be available soon, as I suspect that a wine of this price should be through its aging process after being harvested last September and be ready for bottling and soon in the stores. The top French Bordeaux wines that sell for more than $1,000 a bottle are primarily blends of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. But interestingly, Cabernet Franc is the parent to both Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, as well as two other lesser-known grapes, as shown in the graphic from Wine Folly. This gives Cabernet Franc a unique position in terms of its role in wine history. A little before the Revolutionary War, and here in the U.S., a winemaker in France grafted the Cabernet Franc and the Sauvignon Blanc grapes together and created the Cabernet Sauvignon grape, now the grape grown in virtually every major winemaking region of the world. In the late 1990s, researchers at the University of California, Davis, showed that Merlot is also an offspring of Cabernet Franc. The identity of the second parent of Merlot wouldn't be discovered until the late in the year 2000, when an obscure and unnamed variety first sampled in 1996 from vines growing in an abandoned winery in Saint-Suliac in Brittany was shown by DNA analysis to be the mother of Merlot. This grape was colloquially known as Madeleine, or Raisin de Madeleine, because of its propensity to be fully ripe and ready for harvest around July 22nd, the feast day of Mary Magdalene. As the connection to Merlot became known, the grape was formally registered under the name Madeleine Noire de Chartres. Cab Franc is now one of the 20 most planted grape varieties worldwide. Its role has been primarily to blend with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, but it is increasingly popular as a single varietal, and that's what we're exploring this evening. So you've had a chance to taste our first wine, the Lazy Bones. I'm going to suggest now that you pause this recording and give it a chance just to discuss amongst yourself what you thought of the wine. And then when you're ready to go on to the next wine, go ahead and resume, and we'll move on to our second wine. Let me start with an apology for my terrible pronunciation for any French and Spanish names or locations. The 2018 Piero Callejo Cabernet Franc is produced and bottled by Mosquito Muerta Wines. It has a deep, dark red color and begins with elegant red and black fruit aromas of plum and blackberry with some spicy, minty notes. It is a smooth wine with very good balance. The taste features similar flavors to the nose, with some earthy leather notes as well, and a nice, long, dry finish. Round tannins make it easier to drink right out of the bottle than the Lazy Bones. It has a high alcohol at 14.5%. This wine comes from Mendoza, Argentina, and Argentina typically doesn't produce as many of the green aromas and flavors that I'll be talking about in a few minutes, as some Cab Francs do from many other areas. The grapes were hand harvested from each terroir at different dates in order to find the ideal ripeness and expression, and fermented in French oak barrels in concrete tanks at low temperature. 60% of the wine is aged in new French oak barrels for 6 months and 40% in concrete tanks. New oak barrels will add oaky, toasty flavors that give the leathery taste that we noted. After a couple years, the wine has pulled all those flavors out of the oak, and then the barrels are called old oak. Aging in old oak barrels softens the tannins and lets the wine start to mellow faster than it will in the bottle. So many wines use a mixture of old oak and new oak to get the taste that they want. So it is always interesting to see what role oak has in the development of the wine and the mix of old and new oak. This wine only used new oak, and the other aging was done in concrete tanks instead of old oak. The price ranges on this are $15 to $17, but $21 if you have to go to wine.com. On the other hand, if your Costco has it, the price is only $10, and there are no shipping charges. So you might want to check out Costco next time you were there and see if this is a wine that they carry. This 2018 got 90 points from Robert Parker. For fun, I suggest making sure you save some of the first two wines that you are tasting and taste them again at the end of the wine tasting to see how the additional time in the glass has let the wine fully open up.
My thanks to Wine Folly for a great write up they did on Cab Franc and their two very good graphics, the one on the prior slide of parentage and this one on the taste of Cabernet Franc. Cab Franc is a small, thin skinned grape, and black grapes generally pack more of their flavor and tannins into the grape skin than in the pulp or body of the grape. Cabernet Sauvignon, the child, is a thick skinned grape, and that helps create the big, full body wines that Cabernet Sauvignon is known for. Cab Franc produces more of a medium body, with slightly less tannins than its more famous offspring, and that gives it a smoother mouthfeel. It's lighter in color, but darker than Pinot Noir. It has a peppery perfume that blends well with more robust grapes. The graphic shows a medium alcohol level, but the Pero Callejo that we just finished had a high alcohol of just 14.5%. There's an aroma of green pepper that is fairly unique to Cab Franc, and this turns some people off and other people love it. The green pepper aroma is caused by a group of related aroma compounds called prizines for short. These compounds occur naturally in Cabernet Franc vines as natural defense system against pests. And this defense mechanism is part of the reason why this grape successfully grows in such a diverse range of places. Cab Franc ripens earlier than Cabernet Sauvignon, so it can be grown in some cooler climates, such as the Loire Valley in France. So we've finished two wines now, and I'm going to suggest again you pause and compare notes. And here you have a chance to compare our first two wines, the one from California and one from Argentina. Our second wine was more than double the price of the first one, unless you're able to get it at Costco and that incredible savings there. So two different countries, two different price points, two different approaches to the wine. So interesting to compare and contrast. And we'll continue to do that as we add our additional wines. So when you're ready, go ahead and pause. And when you're ready, resume, and we'll go on to our third wine. This is the wine that got me very interested in Cabernet Franc. One of the major liquor stores in D.C., Calvert Woodley, recommended it about 5 years ago. And I tried a bottle, went back, and got some to put in my cellar, and it's been there ever since. The color here is crimson. The aromas are raspberry and maybe rhubarb with some spicy and tobacco aromas. The taste has very nice fruit with silky tannins, making this very drinkable. I love wines with a long finish like this wine has. The vines for this wine were planted in microparcels totaling 39 acres, located in the hills with southern exposure near the city of Carcassonne in the Languedoc region of southern France. This is an excellent climate position where the excesses of the Mediterranean climate are tempered by the softness of the Atlantic climate. This results in sunny, hot, dry days, but cool nights. This harmony creates wines that are fresh, balanced, and elegant, but sell for under $20. This wine was fermented in stainless steel for 20 days at a temperature of 85 degrees, which is elevated. Wine is pumped over 3 times daily during fermentation. It was then aged 6 months in stainless steel before bottling. No oak anywhere in the process. The 2019 vintage is on the market now, so it would appear that Domaine Larocque ages the bottles for about 2 years before they release them for sale. As I mentioned a couple of times, Cabernet Franc is grown in many different countries around the world. The Pero Callejo is a good example of what Argentina is doing, and their neighbor Chile also makes some very good Cab Franc. Another pair of neighboring countries, Australia and New Zealand, are making very good Cab Franc. We'll dive down a little on France in a minute, and the other countries in Europe that are doing good Cab Franc include Italy, and I'll talk about one of the highest rated Cab Francs under recommendations, and that one is from Italy. Also, Greece and Hungary are two other countries in Europe doing some very good Cab Franc. South Africa is making a number of very good wines, particularly red wines, and Cab Franc is one of them. Our neighbor to the north, Canada, is also doing some excellent Cab Franc in the Niagara Valley. If you get up to Niagara Falls to sightsee for any reason, try to leave a day to get a small group tour of some of the Canadian wineries in the Niagara Valley. They're doing some really good wines at attractive prices. Wine Estates is one of my favorites. While you enjoy the Larocque, I will drive down first on the multiple regions in France and then in the US that are making great Cab Franc. This Larocque is from southern France, and the climate there lets them grow almost any grape. They are making very good Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Chardonnay in southern France, but they do not have any well-known appellations, so their wines are generally reasonably priced. In the Pinot Noir wine tasting recording that I posted on YouTube, one of the recommendations is a great Pinot Noir from southern France that's under $20. Bordeaux grows excellent Cab Franc, but it's primarily used in their famous blends along with Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. Probably the best area for Cab Franc in France is the Loire Valley with its cool inland climate. This is the long light brown area on the map in northwestern France. As the third largest appellation in France after Bordeaux and Burgundy, the Loire Valley is highly significant in terms of both quantity and quality wine production. The region generates vast quantities, around 400 million liters a year, of everyday wines, and also some of France's very finest and highest quality bottles. Close to the origin of the Loire River is Sancerre, where the best Sauvignon Blanc in the world is produced. The plains on the French Atlantic, where the Loire runs into the Atlantic near Nantes, is Muscadet country, another one of my favorite white wines from France. The Cab Franc, you can see, is in the middle of the valley, and you see the town of Chinon called out on the map. The primary appellations for Cab Franc in the Loire Valley are Chinon, Saumur, and Saumur-Champigny. The wines are prized for their aromas of ripe berry and sweet spices. Chinon is probably the best known, and many of the labels just say Chinon and don't even mention that the grape is Cabernet Franc. If you see a Chinon wine listed on a restaurant menu, you might want to give it a try. Cab Franc is very widely grown across the U.S., and our two final wines are from Virginia and Southern Oregon. In addition to the well-known locations of California and Washington, there are some locations that we don't usually associate with very good red wine. New York has a rap of making sweet sacramental wine, and it moved to doing that during the Prohibition. But the Finger Lakes of New York are making some very good Cab Franc, and two of the wines on the recommendation list are from there. I was a little skeptical until I got one of them and really liked it. In the Great Lakes region, Cab Franc is valued for its ability to ripen more reliably than other red grapes and produce very good quality wines in Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. None of those states were on my list of making very good wine, but they are getting attention with what they're doing with Cab Franc. The Barbersville vineyard that we'll taste next is in Monticello in Southern Virginia, and one of the wines on the recommendation list is from Northern Virginia. Luca has some very interesting comments about Cab Franc in Virginia as part of his discussion of our next wine. So now we've added a third country, France, to the list of different Cabernet Francs that we've tried. And again, suggest you pause and have a chance to compare notes on the Domaine Larocque, and also how it compares to the other two wines. And some of these discussions may go a little longer as you have that comparison, and who prefers what. What are the ones you think are the best and the ones you like the least. So again, when you're ready to resume recording, we'll go on to our next wine.
In the live virtual Cab Franc tasting that I did, we were very fortunate to have Luca Pascina, who has been the winemaker at Barbersville since 1990, talk about his Cabernet Franc Reserve. I think Barbersville is the best vineyard in Virginia and perhaps the best vineyard on the East Coast. I met Luke at a wine tasting dinner put on by Calvert Woodley. I mentioned I was doing this virtual tasting with his wine as one of the stars, and he kindly offered to join us. I recorded his session, and we'll replay that for you now.
Well, thank you for inviting me overall. I will give you a very quick explanation of why I am here in Virginia. I'm an Italian winemaker, grew up in Alba in Piemonte, and right behind me is a vineyard Cabernet Franc planted in the in the 1970s by an Italian family. And when they purchased the estate, the Zoning family, here in Central Virginia, they planted many different varieties. And among them, fortunately, was Cabernet Franc. That happened in the late 70s. I then joined the state in 1990, hired as a consultant after I worked for 8 years traveling all over Europe and in the US. I was in the Finger Lakes for 6 months, in Napa Valley 6 months, in Penedès, in Switzerland, in North Italy, in South Italy. So I moved a lot. And then turns out that I fell in love with this place. I fell in love with Virginia. In those years, the region was not yet defined, was not yet accepted as a serious grape growing area. And so when I came, I found many varieties, and the varieties that spoke to me as a great potential, the first one was Cabernet Franc. The reason is simple. Even though I never grew Cabernet Franc in Italy, being from Piemonte, we grow Nebbiolo, Barbera, and Moscato, Dolcetto. But in the first 14 years of Barboursville, Cabernet Franc was blended with Cabernet Sauvignon as a blending instrument to be labeled as Cabernet Sauvignon in a small percentage. In the vintage of 1991, I finally had all the estate on my own, and I picked separately Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon. They equally did quite well. Since was a very good growing season, nice, warm, and dry. 1992 instead was quite cooler, somewhat rainy, challenging for sure. And among all the red grapes we were growing here, the best wine produced was Cabernet Franc. And so I took notice of the resiliency of this variety going from a warm, dry season to a cooler and wet season, how well it performed. It produced a good wine in a difficult season, a great wine in a great growing season. With that noted, I suggested to the founder of the estate to start labeling Cabernet Franc as a varietal in the 92 vintage, and for sure convinced them that this would be a variety we needed to plant more of it, and with a more of a logic behind it. The worst thing you can do in starting a new growing region is to plant what sells on the market. And of course, Cabernet Sauvignon was a lot easier to sell, honestly. When we started producing the Cabernet Franc by itself, a lot of people were questioning, what is this? Is that a Cabernet Sauvignon? I say, no, it's not. And some people actually were turned away. They prefer to go to what they know and don't be adventurous in what they don't know. Things are very different nowadays with consumers, but in those years, I found a bit of a resistance. Well, anyway, 30 some years later, in Virginia, Cabernet Franc is the most grown red grape of the state. We're among one of the largest producers with 50 acres and with a total of 6 different parcels of Cabernet Franc within the 900-acre estate. Different slope, different soil profiles, and it's beautiful to see how Cabernet Franc within the estate takes some different style in the overall aromatic texture and aftertaste. So the Cabernet Franc you're tasting tonight, it is the result of these 3 decades of experimentation on Cabernet Franc. And it's per se is a very easy grape to grow, among the easiest because of its adaptability to weather patterns. There are a few things in the vineyard that we have to be implemented, particularly with Cabernet Franc, and is in the transition of the grapes when they go from green to purple. It's called veraison. And sometime on Cabernet Franc, some cluster, they lag behind. And perhaps, let's say 85% are turned purple and 15% are still behind. At that point, if you are a grower looking for volume, you leave them in there. Although keep in mind, those grapes will ripen later. And what Bill described earlier of that aromatic compound is called methoxypyrazine that tastes like green pepper. It is produced by the vine right after bloom, all the way to when the grapes get full size, but they're still green. And it's depleted again with time during the ripening. Therefore, if you bring Cabernet Franc in cool growing season where the seasons are shorter, and you have a season in those areas that is really colder than normal, you end up having some Cabernet Franc that is not quite ripe and it still has some methoxypyrazine. So in cooler climate, occasionally you find this wine with a lot of green pepper. But if you move it to region like Virginia, where it's warmer, and you grow your grapes with certain approaches, you will not find that green pepper character. You find characteristic more similar to, let's say, black currant, that is still a quite vivid, quite beautiful, and more aromas of ripe red fruit. So our style here is not that we choose it; it's that we follow what the season gives us. I think it would be foolish for us to try to ripen some grapes less on purpose and mix them with some grapes that are more ripe to perhaps introduce some of this green pepper into the wine that has more the ripe red fruit and black currant characteristic. The winemaking for us here is very simple, never been very complicated at any time. It's a classic fermentation in stainless steel, pumping over the juice in fermentation for about 7-8 days, and then at the end of fermentation, we normally leave the skin in contact with the fermented wine for a minimum of 10 days. Sometimes we extend it up to 20 days. We do implement a very slight blending of Petit Verdot in Cabernet Franc since the vintage 2001. It can vary from 5% up to 12%. And the decision is made by between myself, my assistant winemaker, and my vineyard manager. One has been with me since 1998. One has been with me since 2008. So we are the team. We taste together. We do our bench trial where we have the Cabernet Franc with 5%, let's say 8%, 12%. We number them. We make them, we number them. The next day we taste, but we always have a staff that renumbers them. I never taste any blended wine I produce unless it's a blind tasting, because that's the only way to have really an objective observation. And so in this case, the Cabernet Franc is about 10% of Petit Verdot. What Petit Verdot brings is a bit more structure, a more firmness, and some freshness because there's a high acidity Petit Verdot. It's aged in about, it varies from 10 to 20% new wood, and the remaining is our barrel that can be from 2 to 5 year old. Spends 1 year in wood and then a few months in bottle and then is released. 2020 in particular was considered by many in Virginia, but by us in particular, a good vintage. It was not a great vintage. We had to do a lot of work in the vineyard. There was some rain through the summers that limited the ripening on some blocks. Nevertheless, being good at selecting the best portion of the vineyards, we were able to produce a Cabernet Franc that has a lot of great attributes. And I know the wine will have quite a good aging potential. I would assess that this wine will have at least 10 to 15 years of aging. When we talk about other greater vintages like 2007, 01, 17, 19, and others, we're looking at aging potential going over 20 years. We still have here on the estate a collection of vintages, and we still have actually available to taste for people that visit vintages from 97, 98, all the way to the current one, which is the 2020. I can talk a lot, as you can tell, but perhaps I can take some questions that the way I make sure I don't omit saying something that for you perhaps is very interesting, some question in particular.
I'll kick it off with an initial question, Luca. Your Nebbiolo was my favorite of your wines, but your hallmark wine is your Octagon. Is the Cabernet Franc part of the Octagon blend?
Yes, it is a it. I say Cabernet Franc is the one that made Virginia what it is, then followed by Merlot, for example, which is into a lot of the best Bordeaux blends in Virginia. There are many. They are all based Merlot and Cabernet Franc. Very few on Cabernet Sauvignon because of the clay we have.
I've got a quick question for you. It's interesting to me as a fairly novice that you were able to put, I believe it was Petit Verdot within. What are the regulations as far as amount of that other grape you can put in and still call it Cab Franc?
For Virginia, it's for the U.S. in every state is 25%.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
no different. Yeah.
So, Luca, this is great. We were just a couple days. Spent a couple days in the Finger Lakes region. We tasted a lot of Rieslings there, but there was some Cab Francs too. I think you commented that they're likely to have a different flavor there. Is that right?
Yeah, it depends very much on the vintage and on the location of the vineyard. If some vintages, there is a more generous amount of heat, and if the vineyard is well exposed, you can ripen Cabernet Franc into mid-late October and be perfectly ripe, very fresh, without green pepper pyrazine tones. Although if you have a shorter season, meaning that you have a cold front coming and you're not fully ripe, I guarantee you're going to have a wine with a lot of green pepper notes.
Okay.
Some consumer appreciate it, some people very despise it. So it's a fine line
Agree.
of preference.
Thank you.
Two of the wines on the recommended list are from the Finger Lakes. So you talked about the warm climate, Luca. Looking at the long term, what's the impact on Barboursville overall of the overall global warming? How much is that going to impact you in the long term?
This may sound weird, but no, we're not experiencing here an influence where we have to be concerned. On the other end, I can tell you that where I'm from in Italy, it's clearly the seasons are becoming warmer and we're picking earlier and earlier. I remember when I was in Italy in the 80s, we were picking Nebbiolo the second, third week in October. Now we're picking Nebbiolo sometime in the third week of September and be done by early October. Here in Virginia, we haven't seen that. Slightly has been a little earlier, but not that much. Reason is that we are positioned at the mercy of the jet stream. So we have either warm and more humid weather from the Gulf, or cooler, drier weather from the north. And the winter here, I still see cold winter. The spring are wet. Summer can be dry or can be wet. So it's more alternating, at least for my 32 years here at the Barboursville. So that's what I have noticed. The one thing that is different, noticeable for me, since I pick mushrooms every spring, I go out to pick morels, is that the spring are shorter. So we have a quick transition from spring to summer. And that is something I have noticed. I recall in the 90s, that's just about every spring, we were cooler, 60s, 70s, some rain, and then gradually we will warm up into mid-May. Some of the recent years, I've seen the temperature in the 80s by mid-April, and never back to 70s.
So not on Cab Franc specifically, but I remember 20-ish years ago, Virginia was not known for its red wines. Now I feel like it's more and more known for its red wines. Any thoughts on why that changed?
It's better growers.
Okay.
Better growers, more experience, better plant material also.
Okay.
The one thing that really, the reason why they hire me in 1990 is that first they hired me as a consultant for 2 months. I went back to Italy and told them, these are all the things you have to change, to implement. But I say the biggest thing you have to do if you really want to make a great wine is you have to gradually remove all your vineyard and replant all of them. The reason is that what they planted in the 70s and 80s was coming from nursery that did not, from California, that didn't have good genetics. A lot of viruses. We had a vineyard of Merlot here that made big cluster, big berries, was barely, in 1991, barely made what I call a red wine. It was just not good genetics.
Mhm.
But when I was in California, I learned they were replanting a lot of vineyard because of AXR1, the rootstock that failed them for phylloxera. And also they had a lot of viruses. And they were starting to plant new vineyards that came from cuttings from nurseries in France and Italy that did joint venture with nurseries in California. So they were propagating this better selected genetic plant material and going in the ground. It happened that I came to Virginia a few years later. I found the same situation. And having learned that in 1986 in Napa Valley, I told them, said, this is what you have to do. They're doing it on the West Coast. You do it here. That's your best chance. They liked it. And at the end of the conversation, I said, well, we understand it's a tough call what you're doing, but we want to try it. Will you go back? And I did.
Luca, thank you so much for
Yeah.
giving us so much time today. And I know you've got to get on another call. So
Yeah.
thank you very, very much.
Thank you to everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Luca.
Hope we'll see you soon.
Bye. Thank you.
My thanks to Luca for that incredible presentation that he gave. And as you saw, I included in the recording some of the discussion questions that he was asked and the answers to them from the live session that we had. And I thought those questions and answers were interesting, so I decided to include them. And I've done the same thing for our next session with Mackenzie for the Griffin Creek. So again, now we're at our fourth pause point to go ahead and discuss the wines. And again, now 4 different wines to compare. And we've gone from $7 to over $30. So interesting from the different price points. So enjoy your discussion. And when you're ready, resume and we'll go to our last wine.
Our final wine is the Griffin Creek Cabernet Franc from the Willamette Valley Vineyards. As I mentioned earlier, I own some preferred stock in Willamette Valley Vineyards, and I'm a big fan of all of their wines. They're doing great things with Pinot Noir up in the Willamette Valley, and their whole cluster Pinot Noir was one of the wines in my Pinot Noir recorded wine tasting. When I reached out to them and asked if they would like to join us and talk about the Griffin Creek wine from the Rogue Valley at the southern end of Oregon, Mackenzie Wolf-Webb, one of their wine ambassadors, was very happy to join us and lead us through that tasting. I will now replay for you the recording of her excellent presentation, which also includes Q&A from the people on the live tasting.
Hello. I actually got to take over Vicky's computer at the moment. So,
hi.
Mackenzie, nice to meet y'all. So thank you for having me on. I am a wine ambassador out at Willamette Valley Vineyards. So we are kind of up higher in Oregon than where we get those grapes from for the Griffin Creek wines. And obviously Willamette Valley, known a little bit more for our Pinot Noirs, for our Chardonnays up here. But we like to have a lot of varieties offered out here. So actually starting kind of in 1996, we started sourcing grapes from places in Southern Oregon, specifically this Quail Run Vineyards is what we work with. And they kind of make all those nice deep reds. And then we get those grapes brought on up to us to make. So I've got the bottle of our 2018 Cab Franc here for y'all. So with this one, with the Griffin Creek lines, really, it's kind of interesting because it is still Willamette Valley Vineyards making it. But Oregon has some very strict wine laws. So we actually are not able to put more than one valley listed on the label. So anytime we source out and get grapes that aren't from specifically the Willamette Valley, then we have to kind of get creative with the labeling because we can't put our name on there and also where the grapes are from. And in a nicer quality kind of wine, you do want to know kind of where those grapes are from as specific as you can get. So on this label, we did opt to say like Rogue Valley from Southern Oregon. down near Ashland, so really the bottom of Oregon there. So then on the bottle, even on front back, it doesn't say anything about Willamette Valley Vineyards. So it's kind of a fun one because it's secretly ours. It is ours. We're just trying to be more transparent in where it's from, so it makes it a little kind of more hazy on who's making it. Very fun one. So with all of our Griffin Creek lines, we get those grapes from Southern Oregon. We just don't get that heat in the Willamette Valley like they do. But we get really nice heat and growing conditions down in that Rogue Valley to kind of get those grapes and really nice strong flavors. So specifically with the 2018 vintage that we have, 2018 was a really nice growing year out here. The weather, it was pretty balanced. So we had some heat, but nothing kind of giant heat spikes. And then into the kind of harvest season, it wasn't too rainy, which is rare for Oregon sometimes. So we had really nice ideal conditions to get that kind of harvested, brought on up, and then pressed and then done up here, start to finish that way. So with all of that, we do like to have our wines, most of our wines, especially the reds, we do in French oak. So we get French oak sent over, and all of the barrels we use here for both Pinots and all of the deep reds are from French oak barrels. And so this Cab Franc, it spent 15 months in the barrel, and then we use 35% of new French oak versus neutral. So basically with that, the first couple of uses of the barrels is what we'd still call new. And that's when it's putting a lot more of those toasty aged notes from the barrels into the wine. But then we want to still have kind of a little bit of a lighter flavor than having all of the whole batch in new oak. So that's why we use 35%. So it has a little bit of that complexity, a little bit of those nice notes from the French oak. But then it is still kind of letting the grapes be a highlight of the flavor as well. So with this one, as you kind of smell it, I see a lot more of the floral, the earthy notes and kind of the smells. We also talk about it having kind of some plum and blackberry notes, which I can kind of pick up in that. But with tasting it specifically, I feel like you get a lot more of the green bell pepper out of this one, especially with this 2018 vintage. We've all been kind of noticing a really kind of present green bell pepper. We like to do some pairings experiences out here so we can really highlight the flavors of the wine with food as well. So one of our pairings has been using this 2018 Cab Franc and being able to kind of really bring out more of that bell pepper with some spicier flavors in that food pairing as well. And I think that really kind of helps with some of those flavors and getting all those notes in the wine. But with this one, I do feel like it's kind of a quicker finish than some of our other bold reds that we have. Doesn't linger too long, but I kind of like that because it just kind of gets you ready for the next sip in my opinion. So yeah, that's kind of what I had to touch on. Love to answer any questions y'all might have about it.
We've all been experiencing quite hot weather, but you are due over the next few days to have really hot weather, I understand. Are you worried about the grapes?
Right. Yeah, it is very, very hot. Not something we're usually expecting and prepared for sometimes. It's been like 100 today. It's getting up to 100. But with it, it's always that balance, right? We had a very, very rainy spring, and it really didn't look like summer until it was a ways into June out here. So with all that, we were expecting a later harvest anyways, into even October, when usually we expect that September time. So the heat, we're hoping maybe will balance out, even though it is that intense heat, kind of just give some more of that warmth and get the grapes kind of going. So it shouldn't be too bad. We have had this last year, we also had a stretch of 100, more than 100 degree for about a week and a half. And it was, again, just kind of watching where the grapes are at. We like to leave some of the vines to kind of lean over the grapes, so they don't get too much of the direct sunlight. So that kind of helps us make sure that they're not getting too much of that heat and just getting some nice strong skins with that. So always something we're looking at, but it should be all right for this year.
Thank you.
Mackenzie, in the broadcast that Jim did for the annual meeting, it was really interesting. He talked about in the Willamette Valley how you really gone to the higher elevations, thinking about the long-term climate impact. Would you care to talk about that for a second?
Right. Yeah. It's a good question. It's been kind of, as we're seeing this wild weather in the past few years, I think it's something that people are looking at a lot more with all of that. And we definitely, especially in our spot here on the main estate, we kind of have been kind of missing all of the rough parts of it, where we landed in a nice spot. So when there was a frost in April that we don't usually expect, it still didn't really affect the vineyards that we have as much as other places had. So we kind of have to look at that a little bit, and definitely we have a nice little spot in the valley that's been avoiding it so far, but I don't know exactly what we'll be expecting in the next few years, and definitely just kind of looking at what technology people are coming out with in the wine industry. I know people are getting very creative on that, but I don't know exactly what we're implementing quite yet. Yeah.
The growing region for this grape, which side of the mountains is it on, west or east?
It would be east, just really south mostly.
I understand south, but
Yeah,
but there's a mountain range that runs north-south.
yeah, it's still on the other, I'm like, now I'm confused.
The dry side. It's on the dry side.
Yeah, it's on that drier side over there. So
Thanks.
I haven't really gotten to see our vineyard space down in the south, but
So the Griffin Creek grapes are coming from a lower elevation than other grapes from your vineyard.
yeah, they're on a little bit of a lower elevation down in our southern region there. Yeah.
So is that hotter or is that cooler?
It's it's definitely hotter out there. That's why with our grapes that we get from up on the properties up here in the Willamette Valley, we've got the lighter Pinots because they don't need all that heat, along with the Chardonnays. They don't need so much heat. And then all of the deeper reds, so Merlots, Cab Sauves, we get Malbecs and Grenache. All of those, all from that same kind of area in the south, just because they get nice heat, so they can really get those stronger skins on the wines.
Okay.
Griffin Creek, their number one wine is the Griffin Creek blend. Can you share with us, is the Cabernet Franc part of that blend?
Yeah, so with the Griffin, we actually call it the Griffin.
Okay.
And it's a blend, so it's a little bit different every year, but usually it's got some of the Cab Franc in there, as well as the Cab Sauv, Merlot. We usually have that as kind of those general three, but the percentages can change from time to time.
I really like it. I don't know about y'all, but I really enjoyed this.
Yes.
And very deep color compared to some of the others I'm tasting. I like the color.
Right.
And I did get the plum and fruit flavors you were talking about.
Although we should have had it in the German wine glasses.
It's very smooth. You had said something about food pairings, and what do you like most to eat when you're drinking this guy?
Smoked meats.
Yeah, so our kitchen is very creative. So when they do the food pairings, sometimes they do things that are more unexpected just to see if they can, I think. So with the Cab Franc, they've been using like this Dungeness crab cake, and then having fire roasted tomato relish that's kind of spicy, and some creme fraiche to kind of cool it down, but some chili threads. All of that kind of together. The spice is really nice with the Cab Franc. I think it really brings out the bell peppery notes and really kind of makes it linger a little bit longer. But crab cake is kind of an interesting choice with that. I just think with that deep red, to have kind of that seafood option is a little bit unique. I don't know if it's something I would be able to come up with in my kitchen, but they're amazing at the pairings out here. So every time you're not sure if it'd even work together, you try it and it works somehow.
It set me back when you said crab cake, but then I thought the green pepper taste will go very well with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a fun one. It's always kind of interesting to see what they pull out of the kitchen because they like to mess with the usuals instead of doing the tried and true methods of pairing.
So on the webpage, there were two other interesting ones that really caught my attention as ones you don't normally see. Lamb shoulder with harissa,
Mhm.
okay, and pork chop stocked with fig and balsamic.
Huh.
Ooh,
This is a very good wine, Bill. I like this a lot.
I can take it in any store.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks to Mackenzie for making it a little more affordable for us for the tasting.
Absolutely. Glad to help when I can.
Real quick, I'm going to be up in Portland visiting my mother in a couple of weeks. Where are you all located?
Yeah, so our spot is about an hour-ish down the freeway from Portland. And then we do have a couple other tasting rooms that might be a little bit closer, but definitely
We're an hour down the road.
nice. Yeah. So it's down underneath Salem that we're at.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
George, I can send you some more information on that.
Yeah.
Well, Mackenzie, thank you very much. This has been great. Any last questions for Mackenzie before we start talking about some other recommendations?
Thank you, Mackenzie.
Thank you,
Of
Mackenzie.
course. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This is our fifth and final pause for you to have a chance to compare the different wines that we've had. So you now have 5 different Cabernet Francs, different price points, different countries. One of the things I think will be interesting is, as I mentioned at the beginning, go back and taste the first two of the least expensive wines that we had, but sitting in the glass for an hour, how are they tasting now versus when you first had them? Have they opened up more and are more enjoyable? I think they might have. I hope you have some fun comparing tastes and comparing notes amongst yourself. And when you're ready to resume this broadcast, this recording, we'll go ahead and get into some recommendations that I have on other Cabernet Francs that I think you'll like. If you would like to taste one of the top-rated Cabernet Franc wines, Guadalatazo's Atracchio is one of the top 3 in every list I pulled up for the very best Cabernet Franc anywhere in the world. This is one of the Antinori vineyards, and it is Beth and my favorite vineyard in Tuscany. We had the pleasure of visiting there last year for a wine tasting and dinner. It is also one of the most beautiful vineyards in Italy, with their vines running right down to the Mediterranean. They do not make traditional Tuscan wines, no Sangiovese, and the Bulgari Valley is ideally suited for the Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc grapes that are grown in Bordeaux. The Rosé is my favorite Italian Rosé and about $16. Their Vermentino White is also under $20, and I did a write-up on it on one of my blog posts. Their Bruciato, Il Bruciato, is an excellent Bordeaux-style blend for $35. And I very seldom pay $100 for a bottle of wine, but I have purchased their Bulgari Superior for $130 on several occasions and have some in my cellar. It is a 97-point wine that is well worth that price. The reason why I did not include their Cabernet Franc in this wine tasting is that I thought the $350 price might scare some people off. I've not tasted this wine, and at that price, I think even paying for a taste might be too much. There are Cab Franc single varietals over $100 and on up to several for $300, so there is a market for this wine at that price. This list of 11 recommended wines are mostly under $30 with one at $50. I've tasted the first 5 on this list and plan to get them again. The other 6 are all highly rated by professionals such as Wine Spectator and Robert Parker. You'll see 2 from Chenin and 2 from the Finger Lakes in New York. I'd also like to call out the 2 Twisted Posts winery in Northern Virginia. We've been there several times for wine tastings and had a great family birthday party there a few years ago. For those in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia area, I recommend visiting them. My favorite of all their wines is their Cabernet Franc. If you'd like a copy of this slide or the full slide deck, email me a note and I'll reply back to you with either this slide or the full slide deck. I do want to take a minute to give credit to the sources that greatly helped me put this together. The websites for Wine Folly and Wikipedia were very, very helpful, and I got a lot of great information from the websites from each of the different wines that we tasted. This is the close of tonight's tasting, and I would love to get some feedback from you on it. Would you have liked to have me include some higher priced wines to sample better quality wines? Are there other wines or topics where you'd like to see me put together a virtual tasting? I will look at a comment you post to YouTube. In the second slide of this video, you saw the address of my blog, and you can post any comments you would like there. If you would like a copy of these slides, perhaps you get the recommendation slide or the upfront slide showing the pictures of the bottles from the 5 wines we had here, you can send an email address to my address and the contact page of my blog, and I'll send the slides to you. If you enjoyed this wine tasting, I would greatly appreciate your going to the blog page for it and giving it a like. As you know, more people are likely to look at a blog posting if they see that other people posted likes for it. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it.